So can you reply in the chat? Can you hear me, guys? Yeah, fine. So we are discussing about some of the basic standards, and we have covered IFRS 15 in the last class. So is it clear, everyone? The IFRS 15, the revenue from contract with the customer. We have discussed about the 5-step model. So is it clear, everyone? Yeah, fine. So we'll do some questions from that standard. I will make you do some questions from that standard. So can you see this question? Can you see this question? Can you reply in the chat, guys? So here, if I'm just going through the question quickly because we have to cover more questions. So you can just quickly go through the question. I will read along with you, guys. So here the requirement is advise Carson company on how the above transaction should be dealt within the financial statements with reference to the relevant international IFRS. So with respect to the relevant IFRS standard, we need to emphasize on the fact that, or we have to discuss about the fact that how will you treat the current situation. So here, Carson company contracts retail vehicle outlets and enters into a contract with customer to construct building on their land. So the contracts have standard terms which include penalty payable by Carson if the contract is delayed. So in the year ended, Carson incurred general and administrative cost of 10 million and the cost related to wasted material of 5 million. This have been recognized as a contract asset. So is it an appropriate treatment? Is it an appropriate treatment? Can you include the administrative cost and the cost of wasted material as a part of your contract asset or as a part of your contract cost? We have discussed about it in the last class, right? Is it possible to include it? No, we should not include any costs which are not recoverable in future. So this wasted material as well as the administrative cost is not something that we have incurred, particularly in direct relationship with that construction, because it's a general overhead cost, right? It's a general overhead cost. So we should not account for that. We should not account for that particular transaction. We should not account for that 10 million and 5 million in the contract asset. Instead, we should write it off to P&L. So we should say that. So how will you frame your answer here? So I will just give a demo here. So first of all, we'll write that as per IFRS 15. So you should not just conclude your answer by just saying that it should be ignored. So first of all, just explain the treatment. As per IFRS 15, the contract cost includes any directly related cost that we can recover in future that can be completely recoverable. In the contract cost, we should not include any sort of administrative cost or sort of wastage material should not be included as a part of your contract cost. Is it clear? So first of all, you'll write the principle. Then we'll apply it to the situation. So for the Carson company, the amount that they have recognized as an asset should be derecognized to P&L. So we should write it off as a expense. Is it clear? Is it clear, everyone, how to frame the answer for it? Yes. So next one, due to poor weather, one of the projects was delayed. As a result, the Carson faced contractual penalties. So even I have discussed about this matter. So whenever we have to make any consideration payable to the customer, if you have any consideration payable to the customer, how will you treat it? How will you treat it? What's the treatment? We have to deduct it from your contract price, isn't it? You have to deduct it from your contract price. So the Carson felt that the penalty should be shown as a contingent liability. penalty should be shown as a contingent liability. Is that a contingent liability, guys? Is that a contingent liability? No. So that's a wrong treatment. So here we should that we have to say that according to IFRS 15, step number 3, when we determine the transaction price, we should consider we have to consider the consideration which we are going to pay to the customer. So the consideration payable should be deducted from your contract price. The consideration payable should be deducted from your contract price. So as a result, we will deduct it from the total contract price, which is like we have to just discuss about the treatment. But the treatment here, they are trying to show it as a contingent liability that is not in accordance with IFRS 15 or even as per IAS 37 does not comes under the scope of IAS 37 because IFRS 15 itself have given a proper treatment with respect to the penalty which we are about to pay to the customer. So we are not supposed to follow IAS 37 here. It is outside the scope of IAS 37. Even we have to mention our point. Is it clear? And here, additionally, during the year, Carson agreed to construct a storage facility on the customer's land for 7 million. But is it a part of your original contract? 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 No. So it's like a contract modification. So when there's a contract modification, if the extra service or goods that we transfer to the customer, if we can identify it separately, if it is distinct, in that situation, the Carson agreed to construct a storage facility on the customer's land for 7 million. So it's a separate item, it's a separate contract. We can distinctly identify it. Okay, it's not a part of your original contract, and this was completed during the current financial year, and this construction has been completed. So we'll account it as a separate contract, and we'll recognize a revenue of 7 million and a cost of sales of 5 million. And it is appropriate to recognize a profit of 2 million in your FS. Is it clear, everyone? Can you reply in the chat? Yeah. So in the same question itself, we have discussed about the contract cost part. We have discussed about IFRS 15 step 3, that is determination of transaction price. And even we have discussed about the contract modification. Isn't it? So this is how the questions can come for your exam. So a single standard will get tested, but I haven't made any sort of calculations here. Did I? No. It's completely about your judgment, and you're giving an advice that how the transaction should be discussed. But there is a way in which you have to explain your answer. I hope that you understood that part. So whichever the relevant principle, you have to quote it first. It's better always you quote the number as well. Even if you don't know the number, it's completely fine. But if you don't know it correctly, don't try to quote it. Okay. But if you are aware about the number, just quote it. So it will give a better presentation to your answer. Then quote the relevant standard. And here, do you want to write the whole 5-step here? Do you want to write the whole 5-step model here? No, this is completely ridiculous to write the whole 5-step model because we have to specify that step, determination of transaction price, because that is more relevant here. There is no need of writing the whole 5-step model here. That's another mistake normally students used to do. They will think that, okay, since I have learned the whole 5-step model, let's see, the examiner will feel like, okay, actually, I have learned the standard, he will give me 7 marks. No, he's not going to give you 7 marks, and literally you're wasting their time as well. And that's how you literally waste your time in exam. Like if you are properly planning your exam, seriously, you'll be having enough time to complete your paper on time and have a look at it again. But if you're simply wasting your time just by simply explaining too much or nothing which is relevant to the answer, obviously that's going to cost you a lot of time in your exam time. Okay, guys, I hope it's clear. Any doubts apart from that in this question? Okay, fine. Okay, so shall we move to another question? Shall we move to another question? Yes. Okay. So just before moving ahead, so just make sure that you do this question. Okay, Clam Music Company. So it's a very good question, but actually we have discussed the situation in the last class. I do remember there was one question with regards to the same scenario. So that's why I'm not doing it again. So it regards to the non-cash consideration. It is with respect to non-cash consideration. So guys, make sure that you just go through it. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so I'm just focusing on the main standard. So we have completed IFRS 15. So now we'll move ahead to IFRS 15. IFRS 15 is done. So next one is about IFRS 16. So we haven't discussed about it in the last class, right? Last class. Yeah. Yeah. So we'll discuss about that standard. So what is IFRS 16, guys? What's the standard IFRS 16? It's a very important standard. It is lease. It is lease. So what's the type of question you can expect from this standard? First of all, you will get a scenario. You will get a scenario where you may be asked to identify whether it's a lease or not, whether the contract itself is a lease or not, whether the contract itself is a lease or not. So how will you identify whether the given contract is a lease or not? How will you identify whether the given contract is a lease or not, Nihal? Any of you? Anvita, Grace, Nabil. I'm just calling some random names. Just try to figure out, like, from your knowledge which you have gained from your classes. If you are given a situation and you have to identify whether it's a lease or not, how will you identify it? Or what are the conditions you have to check? Or what are the criteria you have to check? Can you reply in the chat, guys? Okay. Right to control use of an asset in exchange of consideration. Right of use of asset. Yes, yes, yes. So the first step is we need to identify the underlying asset. So we have to identify an asset. So what do you mean by underlying asset? An asset which comes as a part of your lease contract. An asset which comes as a part of your lease contract. That is known as lease contract. Sorry, that's what known as underlying asset. Asset which comes as a part of your lease contract is known as underlying asset. Is it clear? Then apart from that, whether the transfer of economic benefits of this particular underlying asset to lessee. Okay, there should not be any sort of intervention from the lessor side that will restrict ourselves from enjoying the benefit of our asset. So we have to check it. Then what is third criteria? What is the third criteria? Can you reply in the chat? What is criteria number 3? Yeah, the direction to use. We have to check whether there is direction to use, whether we have got the direction to use this. Perfect. So if all these criteria are met, then we can identify that given situation where the lease, whether that situation can be considered as a lease contract or is just a service contract. Are you getting it? So let's say the lessor is still having that option or have the rights to substitute the asset. the underlying asset can be substituted by the lesser. What is this? What does it indicate? What does it indicate? Have you got the control or not? Have you got the control here? Can you reply in the chat? Have you got the control here? The lesser still have the right to substitute that underlying asset. What does it indicate? No, we haven't got the control, right? Okay. So it's always very important to assess whether in a given situation, do you whether the lessor is having a right to substitute that underlying asset. If the lessor is having an option to substitute that underlying asset and it does not cost much to the cost of substitution is really less, in that situation, we can consider it as a lease contract. We can consider it as a lease contract. Is it clear, guys? Can you reply in the chat? So that's a type of question you can expect in lease liability part or in the lease contract. So we have to learn the basic definition of lease. So lease is a contract in which the control, the right to use of an underlying asset will be transferred from lessor to lessee over a period of time, and in exchange we have to give certain consideration. Are you getting it? And these are the three criteria we have to check whether it's a lease or not. Now moving ahead, what's the second type of question you can expect in lease? So of course, obviously, it's very important that how will you initially account for lease. So when we account for lease, when we literally account for lease, just bear in mind, any sort of lease which is more than, where the lease term is for more than 12 months, then we have to recognize the asset as well as lease liability. Then we have to recognize the asset and lease liability. So how will you recognize the asset here? Debit right to use and credit lease liability. So it is debit right to use and credit lease liability. Are you getting it? So we need to know how will you calculate the lease liability. Can you just tell me how will you calculate the lease liability, or what all includes in lease liability? So lease liability present value of future lease payments. Yes. Lease liability will include the present value of future lease payments. So what all includes in the lease payments, guys? What all includes in the lease payments? What all includes in the lease payments? What all includes in the lease payments? Can you reply in the chat? What all includes in the lease payments? It will include fixed lease payment, then variable lease payment, then the residual guarantee, then if there is a purchase option and it is probable that you'll purchase it, then you have to include it, and finally the termination penalty. Is it clear? So the lease present value of lease payment, so these payments will include fixed payment, the variable payment, then the residual value guarantee, then the purchase option, and if it is probable that the lessee will purchase it at the end of the lease term, and the termination penalty. So termination penalty means there will be a non-cancelable period for the lease, and if we are canceling it before that non-cancelable period, we have to pay the penalty to the lessor. Even that should be included as a part of your lease liability calculation. Is it clear, everyone? Yes. Do you have any doubts in any of this item? The fixed, variable, residual value guarantee, purchase option, and termination penalty. Did anyone of you have any doubts? If you have, please feel free to ask. If any doubts in any of this following adjustment, please let me know. Yeah, residual value guarantee. So the residual value guarantee means it's an amount that we are promising to the lessor at the end of the lease term. If you are, it's not happens in every situation, but if the lessee is promising an amount, a minimum amount of residual value to a lessor, then we will transfer that amount to lessor at the end of the lease term. So if that condition is specified in the contract, then we have to include that residual value guarantee because it's a part of your liability. Purchase option means at the end of the lease term, the lessee will give an option. The lessor will give an option to lessee to purchase that underlying asset. So if it is probable that you will exercise that option to purchase, okay, then we have to include it as a part of your lease liability calculation. Is it clear? Perfect. Yes. So once we calculate the lease liability, subsequently, this liability will increase by the rate of interest which we have used to calculate the present value of lease liability, and will decrease by the lease payments. So subsequently, this liability will increase by the rate of interest and decrease by the lease payments. So the rate of interest that will get charged to SOPL as a finance cost, and this decrease, the lease payments will be shown as a part of your statement of cash flows. The termination penalty means if there is a non-cancelable period and if you are terminating the contract before the cancellation period, then the lessee needs to pay a compensation to your lessor. So that is known as termination penalty. So again, it's an obligation for the lessee. Because lessee needs to pay it, right? Is it clear? And with the is it perfect? So subsequently, there might be situations in SPR where need to understand whether we need to reassess the lease liability. So in which all situations we have to reassess the liability? If there is a change in the lease payment in accordance to the inflation, or in accordance to the market index, or even we know that option to purchase, option to purchase that asset. Initially, that option, there was no probability regards to the fact that we will exercise that option to purchase, but subsequently after 2 years, we'll get to know that the lessee is having a thought of exercising that option to purchase the underlying asset from the lessor. So in that scenario, we have to consider the present value of that purchase option, whatever the amount we are supposed to pay to the lessor to purchase the underlying asset. That amount should be discounted and will get added to your lease liability portion. Okay, so exercise. If the purchase option is exercisable, subsequently we'll came to know that okay, this purchase option is exercisable. So in these situations, we have to reassess. We have to reassess the lease liability. We have to reassess the lease liability. Is it clear, guys? Yeah. So just we'll do another question. So just note down this lease liability portion. Just note liability portion. Okay. So there might be situations of reassessing the liability. So when we reassess the liability, if there is an increase in the liability, let's say if there is an increase in liability, then how will you account for it? Then how will you account for it? That will increase your right to use. That whatever the increase in lease liability, that increase should happen in your right to use, and that increase should go to your lease liability. So that increase in that lease liability will increase the right to use, because anyway it should have a double effect, right? So that in the debit side it will go to right to use account, and the credit it will go to lease liability account. Is it clear? So the reassessment of lease liability will change your right to use calculation and the lease liability calculation. Are you getting it? Okay. So another situation, like obviously now next one is about the initial measurement of RTU. So how will you initially measure RTU here? How will you initially measure RTU? Just 1 minute, please. Can you see the file now? Sorry guys. Can you see the file now? The initial measurement of right to use. So the initial value of right to use will include the initial measurement of lease liability plus the initial cost less incentives, then the present value of dismantling cost. So all these factors will be included. All these factors will be included in your lease liability calculation. So initial direct cost, the initial measurement of lease liability less any incentives, and the present value of dismantling cost. So that's how we'll calculate the right to use. And subsequently, this right to use will get depreciated. Over the lower of useful life of the asset or the lease term, whichever is lower. Are you getting it? Yes. So these are the main elements of lease, IFRS 16 lease. Then there is another situation in lease which is sale and lease back. Another questionable area is sale and lease back. So what do you mean by sale and lease back? How will you account for the sale and lease back? So normally we know that when we are making a sale, when we are making the sale of an asset, we can recognize the whole amount as profit on the disposal, right? That is literally whatever the profit on disposal, we can recognize the whole amount in the P&L. But in a sale and leaseback situation, we know that initially we are selling off the asset. So as per IFRS 15, we'll check the fact that we'll check whether the control has been transferred or not. We will check whether the control has been transferred or not. Are you getting it? So once the control is transferred, then we can consider it as a sale and leaseback situation. So when we lease it back, when we lease the same asset which you have sold, when we lease it back, when we lease back the underlying asset, what will happen there? When we lease back the underlying asset, what will happen there? Can you reply in the chat? The control of the asset, which we have sold is retained back through leasing, isn't it? So when we sell the asset, normally in a normal situation, when we sell the asset, we can recognize the whole amount as profit on disposal. But when it's a sale and leaseback situation, on the sale, we can recognize profit. But since the same asset is getting leased back from your buyer, So as a result, we can say that even though we have lost the control on disposal, literally we are regaining it, or we are reacquiring it through that leasing transaction. Through lease, we are reacquiring that control. Is it clear? So literally, the seller can only recognize, the seller can only recognize the profit for the amount, the profit for the percentage of control he has transferred to the buyer. Are you getting it? So this is a very important treatment we have to explain in SBR. Okay, so there you may have learned certain ways to calculate the profit and all this stuff in F7, but you have to literally explain that concept in SBR. So this is what you have to write in your paper. So when it's a sale and leaseback situation, we can effectively recognize the profit for the percentage of control here, which we have transferred to the buyer. So literally at the sale, we are transferring the control, let's say 100%, and on leaseback, we are reacquiring it as well. Isn't it? Are you getting it? So the question here is, how will you calculate that control? How will you calculate the percentage of control that we have received from the customer? So how will you calculate that control? Can you reply in the chat? So we need to calculate the right to use in the sale and leaseback situation. So in the normal situation, we know that how to calculate the right to use, right? But when it comes to sale and leaseback, we know that this asset was already held in my books. So I will cancel the carrying amount of that asset multiplied by the obligation which you have incurred for with respect to that lease liability divided by അത് പൈസ പോയതിന്റെ ഞാൻ ഇപ്പൊ ജിപേ വർക്ക് ആവുന്നില്ല ലൈക്ക് ദാ ജിപേ വർക്ക് ആവുന്നില്ല ഫോൺ പേ വഴി so it's like carrying amount multiplied by lease liability divided by the fair value of the asset. So this is how we'll calculate the right to use. This is how we'll calculate the right to use in a sale and leaseback situation. Is it clear, everyone? So literally in this particular scenario, the lease liability divided by fair value, that helps us to identify that the percentage of the control that we have, that helps us identify the percentage of control that we have retained through leasing. So let's say if you have acquired 85% of the control, you have acquired 85% of the control through leaseback. So when we are actually selling that asset, you lost 100% control, and through leaseback you gained 85%. So literally, what's the percentage of control lost? What's the percentage of control lost? 15%, right? So it's weird. So on the percentage of control lost, we can recognize the profit. So we can recognize the profit on disposal, but only for the percentage of control that we have lost. Are you getting it? So how will you calculate that profit, the total profit will be fair value minus the carrying amount of the asset. We'll compare the fair value minus the carrying amount of the asset. Is it clear, everyone? So what's the entry? What's the entry for accounting for sale and lease back? It is debit cash. Then debit, there's a lease back as well. So debit right to use, and credit, we are writing off the asset initially from our books, right? So the asset was held at carrying amount. So we'll write it off. So credit carrying amount, then credit lease liability, and the balance sheet figure will be P. Is it clear, guys, this part? Can you reply in the chat? So that's all for lease. That's all for lease. So we can do a question from lease. Just wait. So can you see the revision kit? So just read the question. Just quickly go through the question. So have you read the question, guys? So here, initially partially signed into a lease to use an item of machinery. The useful life and the lease term were 5 years itself. So the lease payments are due annually in advance. The lease payment for the first year was 1.2 million. And the rate of interest rate is 10%. The present value of the lease payment, excluding the payment made on 1st May 2002, since it is in advance, excluding that initial payment, the lease liability is 3.8 million. The lease payment increases annually by the rate of inflation over the previous 12 months. So on 1st May 2003, so literally after 1 year, the inflation due to inflation of prior 12 months was 8%. So that increased your lease payment. That increased your lease payment. Are you getting it? Okay. So which is the scenario they have tested here? It's about reassessment of lease liability, right? So that's what I've told that. There are specific situations that they keep on asking from lease. So one such situation is reassessment of lease liability. So when there is a reassessment of lease liability, we have to recalculate the lease liability, and that movement will be recognized in right to use and in your lease liability element, right? Are you getting it? Can you reply in the chat? Yes. So I will just show how to frame that answer. So now can you see both the Word file and the question? Yes. So how will you frame your answer? So first of all, you will frame the answer in such a way that as per IFRS 16, as per IFRS 16. So once the lease is recognized, the lessee needs to account for right to use and lease liability. And the lease liability will include the present value of lease payment, which are not paid in the commencement date. And the RTU will include the present value of future payments, the initial direct cost, and any present value of dismantling cost and any initial. And in April 2003, they have accounted for lease liability correctly on 1st April 2003. So the opening lease liability was how much? So what was the opening lease liability here? It was 3.8 million. So subsequently, it will increase by the rate of interest. And do we need to make any payments in the current year? So literally your closing liability will become how much? What's your closing liability here? What's your closing liability? Can you reply in the chat? What's your closing liability, guys? 4.18. Isn't it? Yes. On that date, when we initially recognize the right to use, we know that 3.8 million is the liability value and plus the initial payment. What's the initial payment? The initial payment is 1.2 million. So 3.8 to 3.8 million plus 1.2 million. Your total liability became how much? 5 million. 5 million. So that 5 million is your right to use and your lease liability is 3.8 million on 1st May 2002. So subsequently, this right to use should be recognized. Will subsequently, the subsequent measurement, subsequently, it should be measured by cost model, and then the depreciation should be given lower of useful life or lease term. So that is 5 million for 5 years. It is 1 million per year. So as on 31st April 2003, the machine carrying amount will be 44 million, right? After charging that 1 year's depreciation, the movement in the RTU will be literally 4 million. The carrying amount will become 4 million there, isn't it? Can you reply in the chat? You get accounted in the lease liability and RTU calculation. So due to inflation in the past 12 months, the previous 12 months, the lease payment has been increased by 8% from 1.2 million to 1.3 million. So literally we have to reassess the lease payment here. So it is 1st May 2003 from next 4 years. For the next remaining 4 years, the lease payment should be calculated at 1.3 million. The lease payment should be calculated at 1.3 million. That is 1.3 million, 1.3 million, 1.3 million, and 1.3. And literally we have to discount it with the relevant discounting factors. Then you will get the present value of this lease payment. So ultimately it become how much? It is 4.534. It is 4.534. Are you getting it? Can you reply in the chat, guys? So what was your expected liability? What was your expected liability as on 31st April 2024? It was 4.18. It was 4.18. But because of the reassessment in the lease payments, we get to know that our new liability become 4.534. So what's the increase? What's the increase in the liability? What's the increase in liability here? What's the increase in the lease liability? 0.354. 0.354 is the lease liability. So 0.354 will get debited to right to use and credited to lease liability. And therefore, the opening lease liability will become 4.534 minus lease payment of 1.3 million. Then the balance will be 3.234 because the advance amount, right? Then the effective rate will get calculated on that remaining figure, which is 3.234. And finally, you will get the closing lease liability. And with respect to RTU, the carrying amount was 4 million. So with 4 million, we have to add 0.354 million. So it will be 4.354. And 4.354 will get depreciated over a period of, the remaining period is how much? 4 years. So 1.09 will be the depreciation charge. Is it clear, everyone? Yes. So now, with respect to lease, we have another topic to be discussed. That is with respect to lease for otherwise it is lesser accounting. How the lessor will treat lease. For the lessor, he have two options, right? The lessor can either account for the lease as a operating lease, or he can account it as a finance lease. So how will you get to know that whether it's an operating lease or finance lease? Literally, we can say that if the risk and rewards are transferred from the lessor to lessee with respect to the underlying asset, then we can recognize it's an operating lease, right? So if the risk and rewards are transferred to lessee from lessor, then we will recognize it as finance lease. Then we will recognize it as finance lease. Perfect. And if the risk and rewards are not transferred, with respect to the underlying asset, are not transferred, then how will you account for it? We'll account it as operating lease. So literally there are different conditions which we can check to confirm the fact that whether it's a operating lease or a finance lease. Perfect. So what are the different factors? So the different factors will include, let's say, at the end of the lease term, if the lessee is having the option to purchase this underlying asset at a price lower than its fair value, then that's an indicator that it needs to be accounted as a finance lease. Perfect. Another condition where we can say that the present value of lease receipts that you're about to receive from the lessee by the lessor itself, if that present value of lease payments which you are about to receive from the lessee, if it is somewhere equal to the fair value of that asset at the time of entering into the lease, whatever the fair value of that underlying asset, literally the present value of the future lease receipts is almost equal to the fair value of that underlying asset. In that situation, again, it's an indicator that that's a We have to account it as a finance lease rather than operating lease. Okay. Or let's say if the lessee is having an option to rent it for a subsequent period or for a secondary period, but for a rate which is lower than, at a rate of interest which is lower than the market rates, at a rate of interest or at a lease rentals which will be lower than the market rates. Okay, then yeah, the lease is for a major period of its economic useful life. If you are leasing the asset for the major period of the economic useful life, all these factors indicates that all these factors, it's not the criteria. It's not mean, I don't mean to say that all this criteria needs to be met. These are certain conditions which helps to identify that whether it's an operating lease or a finance lease. So just check whether these above mentioned factors are there in the question. Then you can literally easy to counter it, and by saying, we can say that whether it's a operating lease or finance lease. So now it's a finance lease. If it's a finance lease, how will you account for it? We have to recognize the present value of future lease receipts as a net investment in your lesser books, and we have to de-recognize that asset from your books because you have transferred the control of that asset to the other party. So legally, since you are entitled to that asset, but in substance, you have transferred the control to the other party. Are you getting it? Can I reply in the chat? So in the same way, how will you treat the operating lease? The operating lease will be treated using straight line method. Like let's say you have a lease payment period for 12 months, and the overall payment you are going to get, is 180,000. So that's the overall payment. Out of which they have already given you another 60,000 in advance. So the lease period is for 12 months. Totally you are about to receive 180,000, out of which they have already given you 60,000. So how will you recognize it? Can you recognize that 60,000 directly in your income? No. We have to follow a straight line method. So what do you mean by straight line method? We need to check what's the overall income from that contract. So what's the overall income from this contract here? It is 180,000. This 180,000 should get splitted over a period of 12 months. Over a period of 12 months. So 180,000 divided by 12 months. How much it is? How much it is per month? What's the profit that we can recognize? What's the income that we can recognize? How will we recognize it? 180,000 divided by 12. 15,000, right? 15,000. So even though we have received 60,000 in advance, we can't recognize the whole amount in the P&L. We'll recognize 15,000 for the time being, since it is year one. It is for first month, and the other amount should be deferred, should be considered as a deferred income. So we should be following straight line method to account for the operating lease. Are you getting it? Yeah, it's a advanced, yes, it's an advanced treatment, but we have to recognize the income over a period, not on the basis of how we receive the cash. We have to account it on a straight line method. Is it clear, guys? Okay. So, and Chris, you have got it out, right? Present value of lease receipts are as investment. How it will be recorded? It will be recorded as an asset. It will be recorded as an asset. Okay. So we'll do a question with respect to that part. So just read the question. Just read the question. It's a bit lengthy question. So here, they are actually trying to misstate, manipulate the FS. So can you see the question, guys? Okay. So just go through it and check whether that treatment is correct or not. Whether that treatment is correct or not. The Hallen property treatment is correct or not. So just quickly go through the question. So it's an introduction. So the company have certain restrictions from the bank. So it means to say that the long-term debt to equity ratio should not exceed 50 million, 50%. Okay. So included within the non-current asset of Fiskerton is a property in Hallam which has been leased to Edingley under 40-year lease. The property was acquired for how many years? Acquired for 20 million on 1st October 2007 and was immediately leased to Edingley. The asset was expected to have a useful life of 40 years at the date of acquisition and have minimal residual value. Okay. Just quickly go through that situation. Just read it faster. Is it done, guys? Have you read the question? So is that treatment is correct here? Is that treatment is correct? So is it, do you have to think from the perspective of a lessee or lessor here? Do we have to think from the perspective of a lessee or lessor? Here, Fiskirton Company, is it a lessee or lessor? Yes, they are a lessor, right? They are lessor. So literally, they are leasing this asset for a 40-year lease period. And the asset has having an expected useful life of a 40 years. So since we are leasing it for a majority or almost the whole economic useful life, so literally we can say that it's a leasing transaction, but in which the risk and rewards are completely transferred to lessee. So thereby we can conclude that this is a transaction for finance lease. We have to account it as a finance lease. But how they have treated it, the Fiskirton, have they done the treatment appropriately in accordance with IFRS 17? Sorry, IFRS 16? No. So they have choose to account it as an operating lease. Why? Because if they are choosing it as operating lease, so let's say it's like an investment for you, right? Because it's a kind of investment property through which we can earn rentals. So they have accounted as a operating lease and they are accounting it as an investment property through which they can earn rentals. And thereby they have shown the movement, and they have shown the movement of 22 million and 22 to 28 million. They have shown these movements in P&L. But is it appropriate to show that movements in P&L? No. And most importantly, since we have discussed the standard IFRS 13 yesterday, we have discussed about IFRS 13, right? So while we discuss about, when we have discussed about IFRS 13, I've told that here, what's the value of this asset? They have estimated 28 million, which was determined by the sale of a similar size property. But this property was located in a much more prosperous area and built with a high grade of material. So is it an appropriate valuation? Is it an appropriate valuation? You have to consider the location, the restriction, right? And the nature of the asset. So it's a completely, even though it's a similar item, but it's located in a highly prosperous area and built with a high grade of material. By looks, it may look similar, but it's not an identical item. So we have to use the level 2 method. That is level 2. We have to adjust for the fair value. We have to make relative adjustment to the 28 million to recognize that value. So independent professional value are estimated the value to be no more than 22 million. So we need to consider that figure. So literally there is some mistakes with respect to IFRS 13, as well as even we have seen a mistake with respect to IFRS 16 as well. So we have to discuss about both these factors and again explain the impact. If you are accounting for it correctly, how it would have impacted your gearing ratio. So literally they are trying to overstate this asset and they are trying to show a higher movement in the investment property to manipulate your FS in such a way that the profit will get overstated as well as even the asset will get overstated. So there is literally no chance of exceeding that gearing ratio. So they are trying to make sure that the gearing ratio should not get exceeded. You should not breach the gearing ratio, the covenant. Perfect. Fine. So here, yeah, that should be direct. I will just show the answer. Yeah. So can you see the answer here with respect to fifth quadrant? So under IFRS 16, the lessor should account for the lease transaction. A financial risk is the risk as a finance lease. So finance lease if the risk and rewards of the underlying asset is transferred to, let's see, if not, it should be accounted as per operating lease. If not, it should be accounted as per operating lease. So in case of Hallam property, since Wisconsin is giving the asset for the major economic life, should be accounted as a finance lease. So we will recognize an amount equal to the present value of these receivables, and the asset will get recognized from the FS of Wisconsin. So this is the appropriate rate. So now we have to explain about the impact. So the treatment of accounting this property as per IAS 40, as per IAS 40 should be reversed. Here, in order to make sure that the company should not breach the contract, they may have followed an inappropriate accounting standard. So here, they have wrongly taken the fair value as 28 million since it is not an identical item. So we should make adjustments to the fair value referred to the active market. So according to the existing capital structure, so what is the existing capital structure? Long-term debt is 50,000 divided by equity. What is equity here? 20,151 plus 70,253. So what's your existing gearing? 49.85. So is it breach that contract? Is it breach the covenant? Is it breaching the covenant as per the existing current affairs? Is it breaching the covenant? Is it breaching the covenant? No. As of now, it is not breaching. But why it is not breaching? Because they have shown literally the movement. The asset should be de-recognized at 20 million itself. So 20 million to 28 million, that movement of 8 million is recognized as an income in 70 to 53 in the retained earnings as an income from investment property. We have shown that 8,000 in 70 to 53. So that income needs to be de-recognized. That income needs to be de-recognized. So literally your reverse earnings will be how much? What will be a reverse retained earnings? The reverse retained earnings will be 62,253. Okay, so if you are following that model, if you are using that figure, that is 62,253, if you are using that figure, just try to calculate the new gearing amount. What's the new Yeah, here we haven't received enough data with respect to the present value of lease receipts calculation. So that's what I saw in SBI. It's not about the calculation. We have to suggest the appropriate treatment. That's it. We can just suggest that this is how it should be accounted. You are not supposed to do any calculations. You're just giving a guideline on how to account for it. Perfect. Chris. Okay, so since they have accounted for that that Hallam property as an investment property, literally there is a gain of 8,000 because when we have choose to give it for lease, the asset value is 20 million. From there, now they are recognizing it is to 28 million, ignoring the valuation from an independent valuer. So literally we can see that what's the total gain, what's the total overstatement in the gain. The total overstatement in the gain is 8,000. Is it? So I will reduce that balance. It will be literally 62,253 and the gearing will reach 54.1. So here, since the company already have negative cash flow, the breach of covenant will result in going concern issue by making immediate payment of 50. Is it clear? Is it clear, guys? Because it is told that whenever it is getting breached, if the covenant is getting breached, we have to repay that loan immediately. The Fiskalton already has a negative cash balance. So if you have to repay that loan, literally the company is getting liquidated there, right? So we can consider it as a going concern issue as well. Are you getting it? So this is how you can expect the questions in SPR. So discuss how the Hallam should have accounted for and explain the implications of financial statements. So this was your recap. So discuss the treatment and explain the impact on the financial statements. Is it clear, guys? So just go through this scenario as well. It's about IFRS 15. Just quickly go through it. Just quickly go through it. Just read that question. So have you read that question? So what's the requirement here?
we need to identify whether the contract should be accounted on a stage over the time or at the point of time. So how will you account for it? At the point of time? We have discussed about this scenario in the last class, right? So here, as per IFRS 15, the revenue should be either accorded at over a period of time or at a point of time. So for the fiscal return, since they have no right to receive any payment according to the stage of completion, or for the work completed over the time, the initial deposit will be considered the payment of transaction price will be accounted as a part of transaction price, and no revenue will be recognized till delivery of the asset. So by doing so, they are trying to overstate the revenue. Is it clear, everyone? So this item should be recognized at the revenue at the point of time rather than over a period of time. Can you reply in the chat? So we have discussed about lease and we have discussed the questions from IFRS 15. So these two are very important questions or very important sections, very important standards when it comes to SPR. So next one will reverse financial instruments. So that's another important standard. If they are getting the payments in stages, at each stage of completion, we would have recognized the revenue over a period of time. Is it clear? Simon? No, the deposit in that scenario, the deposit will recognize in accordance to that model, right? On the basis of percentage of completion, will recognize a certain percentage of that deposit as a revenue. Are you getting it? But if they fail to complete, like obviously we have to repay it. So we have to consider that situation. We have to consider the probability of that chances of, if there is chances of repaying that amount, we have to consider it. So in that scenario, as we discussed earlier, it's a kind of consideration that it's payable to the customer. So we'll deduct it from the transaction price. Are you getting it? Yeah, we'll look at the probability. Yeah. Okay.
The next one is about financial instruments. So this financial instrument is getting treated under financial instrument standard. Is getting dealt under different accounting standard, that is IAS 32, IFRS 9, and IFRS 7. So literally there are three different accounting standards. We have to check here. This is IFRS 9, IFRS 7, IFRS 9, and IAS 32. Are you getting it? Okay. So in IAS 32, how will you account for, as per IAS 32, how will you account for a, we'll discuss about the definition. So in IAS 32, literally we are discussing about the definitions of financial asset, financial liability, and definition of, we're discussing about the definition of financial asset, financial liability, and equity. So what do you mean by a financial asset? What do you mean by financial asset? Or what do you literally mean by a financial instrument? Lease, that we have something which you have learned right now, is a perfect example for a financial instrument. So financial instrument means it's a contract in which for one party it will create a financial asset, and for another party it will create a financial liability or equity. Are you getting it? So it's a contract in which for one party it will create a financial asset, and for the other party it will create a financial liability or equity. So that's a situation we have learned with respect to lease as well, because as a part of that contract, for lessor it's a financial asset because he have the right to receive the cash from the lessee. And what about lessee? It created a liability there for lessee. They have an obligation to pay this lease payments, isn't it? Can you reply in the chat? Yes. So lease is an example for financial instrument. Then share, if you are investing in the shares of a company, for the investor is a financial asset, and for the company who issued the shares, if it's an ordinary share, they will account it as an equity. So these are different examples of financial instruments. So when it comes to financial asset, so financial asset can be recognized as a situation where we'll can account it as a right to use, a right to receive cash. So right to receive cash. If you have a right to receive cash, then we'll account it as a financial asset. Then, apart from that, or if you have the right to receive any financial instrument, the right to, if you have right to receive financial instruments under conditions which are favorable. So let's say if you're entering into hedging and you are in a gaining position, then you have a right to exchange or receive the financial instrument or transfer the financial instrument under conditions which are favorable. Okay. Then the right to receive variable number of shares as a result of any transaction. If you have a right to receive a variable number of shares from another party, even we'll consider it as a financial asset. So financial asset can be explained in different ways. So literally that's a drawback for with respect to that financial instrument standard, because there is no single definition. They literally have considered several situations. On the basis of that situation, they have come up with the definitions. So the right to receive cash, we can give an example there. Receivables, trade receivables is an example for the right to receive cash. Then right to receive financial instruments under favorable, I have told that you can remember the hedging situations. And right to receive variable number of shares, it will happen when there is a kind of share-based payments or something like that, and you're about to receive the cash. Okay, you're about to receive the shares there. Okay, so financial asset can be explained in different ways. In the same way, the financial liability. So with respect to financial liability, we can almost use the same definition, but little changes will be there. There, it's not a right to receive cash, it's an obligation. It's an obligation to pay cash. You have an obligation to pay cash as a result of a contract, or the right to, instead of receive, transfer financial instruments under conditions which are potentially unfavorable. Then right to receive, instead of right to receive variable number of shares, we'll say that right to issue variable. If you have obligation to issue variable number of shares, we'll account it as a financial liability. So it's very important to distinguish between financial asset, liability, and equity. So what do you mean by equity? It is a residual interest. So as we discussed in the last class, if you have a 30% investment in a company, the 30% shares that we hold, so the residual interest in the net assets of an entity, that is known as equity. So this is what it is explained in IAS 32. Are you getting it? So sometimes you can get a question where we will ask you to distinguish between a financial liability and equity. So even if you see that, okay, let's say the company, so always there can be situations where, let's say if the company have obligation to transfer fixed number of shares in future, then we can account it as equity. So can you give me an example for it? Yes, it is convertible bond. I hope all of you have heard about the convertible bond right from F7. So in convertible bond, the holder is having an option that he can either go for cash payment or he can get the shares. So with respect to the shares, so literally we have to understand the fact that the shares which you have to issue to the bond holders will be fixed. Let's say for every one bond, we'll give a 10 shares. So the number of shares are fixed there. So 10 shares for each bond, like that. So since the number of shares are fixed, how we have accounted for it? We have accounted for that option to convert into shares as an equity. We'll account it as an equity, right? So if you have an obligation to issue fixed number of shares in future, then it's an equity. But if you have an obligation to issue variable number of shares, then we'll account it as a liability. Okay, so there can be some questions, especially from this area, right from the beginning of the standard, that is distinguishing between a financial liability and a asset, or financial liability and equity. Are you getting it? Okay. So whenever we have an obligation, we need to check. Is there any option? Is there any option to avoid that obligation? If there is any option to avoid that obligation, if there is an option to avoid that obligation, if the answer is yes, then we'll account it as equity. If the answer is no, then it's a financial liability. Then we have to account it as a financial liability. Are you getting it? Okay, so one example being, with respect to preference shares, we have, especially if it's a cumulative preference shares. So if it's a cumulative preference shares, every year the dividend will get cumulated. So ultimately, when we pay the dividend, we have to pay it together. So you don't have any option to avoid that obligation there. So how will you account for the preference shares? Legally, these are shares, but in substance, the preference shares should be accounted as a financial liability. Should account it as the part of liability, because there you don't have any option to avoid that obligation to pay the dividend. Are you getting it? And what about the ordinary shares? What about the ordinary shares? There, actually, you are getting an option there, whether to pay the dividend or not. So that's why we are accounting it as an equity with respect to ordinary shares. Because there you don't have, even though you need to pay the dividend, but it's an option for us whether to pay it or not. But with respect to cumulative preference shares, is accrued every year. Okay, so it's very important to distinguish between the equity and liability part. That's one type of question you can expect from IAS 32. And apart from that, the presentation of financial asset and liability. So when it comes to presentation of financial asset and liability, the perfect example will be compound instruments. So can you give me an example for compound instruments? Yes, we have just discussed about it, which is convertible bond. So if it's a compound instrument, in that scenario, this convertible bond, let's say with respect to convertible bond, here we have an option to convert it into shares as well, right? As well as we have an obligation to pay cash. So here the obligation to redeem cash should be accounted as a financial liability, and the obligation, that option to convert into shares, should be accounted as equity. So if you are, let's say if you are issued a compound instrument for 200,000, out of which, if you are issued at a rate of 6%, so always understand the convertible bond will be issued at a lower rate of interest compared to the market rate, because we are giving an additional offer for them, that is they can have the option to convert into shares. So let's say the market rate is 8%. Okay, so in that scenario, first of all, you need to calculate the value of liability. How will you calculate the value of liability? The liability will be the present value of future cash flows, that is interest and the principal repayment. And this will get discounted at 8%. That's the market rate of interest. So we'll discount this future cash flows at the market rate of interest. So this amount will be lower compared to 200,000 because we are not charging the market rate of interest here. We are charging a lower rate of interest. So obviously there will be a difference between the amount that we received through that bond issue and the liability amount. So that balancing figure. So whatever the balancing figure, we'll account it as equity, and this will be accounted as a part of your other components of equity because it is an option to convert. It's an option to convert. It will be shown as a part of your other components of equity. Yeah, the interest payment will be 6% of 200,000. Yes. The interest payments will always get calculated on the nominal value, right? Okay. So that's what. So these are the main questions that can get tested here with respect to IAS 32. Is it clear, everyone? Then now with respect to IFRS 9, it's mainly discussing about the treatment of different items, such as, let's say, how will you treat the financial asset in your books. So in under financial asset, basically we have two classifications. First one is a equity investment. If you are purchasing shares in a company, then it's like a equity investments. So now the question is, how will you account for it? How will you account for it? So the equity investments will be accounted under two different models. What are the two different models? Can you reply in the chat? Fair value through P&L and fair value through other comprehensive income. So if it's an equity investments, we have got two options to account for it. That is, the fair value movements can be recognized through FET OCA model or FET P&L model. So since it's an equity investment, that is investment in shares, by default, we'll choose which model? We'll choose FET P&L. So by default, we assume that the shares are held for trading. So we'll choose FET P&L. So if it's an FET P&L model, the fair value movements will be recognized in the P&L. The fair value movements will be recognized in the P&L. And the transaction cost will be accounted as expense in the P&L. Are you getting it? So what do you mean by the fair value movement? The price at which we purchase the share and the value of that fair value of that share at the reporting date. So that if there is an increase or decrease, we'll show it as a part of your P&L. Are you getting it? Can you reply in the chat? Okay. So next one, with respect to FET OCA model. So with respect to FET OCA, can make a revocable election to show it as a part of FET OCA model. So under this model, The fair value movements will be recognized in FAT, in other comprehensive income, and once it is recognized in OCI, we don't have the option to reclassify it to P&L. We don't have the option to reclassify it to P&L even on disposal. Clear? And the transaction cost with respect to the acquisition of that share will be capitalized with the opening value of financial asset. So that will get added to the initial value of that share. And that movement will get recognized in OCA. Is it clear, everyone? And if it's a debt investment, and if it is debt investments, then again we have got three different options. What are they? FAT OCI, FAT PL, and amortized cost. So these are the three different options we have got with respect to debt investments. So with respect to debt investments, if it is amortized cost model, if it is amortized cost model, it is amortized cost model, the opening value of debt, we have to, when we calculate the opening value of debt, if it is amortized cost model, first of all, we can discuss what are the situations in which we can choose amortized cost model. So there are two different tests, the business model test and the contractual cash flow test. So in the business model test, if the business mode objective is to keep this debt instrument to get to keep this a particular debt investment for a long time period of time, they don't have any intention to sell that particular debt investments, debt instruments for any kind of fair value movements in the market. In that scenario, so that's the first business model test. We'll assume that what's the objective of the business. Next one, the contractual cash flow test. Contractual cash flow test means if that particular debt investment will give cash flows exclusively the principal and the interest. It can only give the cash flows exclusively the principal and interest, nothing apart from that. So that's the contractual cash flow test. So if these two tests are met, if we are able to clear these two tests, then we can choose the amortized cost model. Are you fine with it? So first one, it's a business model test, and we have a contractual cash flow test as well. Are you getting it? So then we will select the amortized cost model. Perfect. Can you reply in the chat? So under amortized cost model, as you have seen with respect to FATO, say the transaction cost will get added to a financial asset. Okay. And since it is amortized cost model, how will you treat it? It is opening asset plus effective rate minus coupon interest received is equal to closing asset. Are you getting it? So this is how we'll treat it. This is how we'll treat it when it comes to an asset in the amortized cost model. Are you getting it? So just note it down. So we noted it. So if it is next one, we have FAT OCA model. So there in the business model test, if you get to know that, let's say if the company is having an option the company is planning to sell this debt investment, if the opportunity arises, only if the opportunity arises. So they are not keeping this financial asset for trading. They are planning to hold it for a long period of time. But if the opportunity arises, then they will sell it. Then we will choose which model. Then we will choose fair value through OCA model. So here the treatments are almost the same. The transaction cost will get added, and subsequently the asset is getting valued using amortized cost model itself will follow the same format. But at the end, we will remeasure the fair value of the debt investment at the reporting date, and the movements will get recognized in OCA, and this movement will get recognized in other comprehensive income. Are you getting it? And here, this gains which are recognized in OCA can be reclassified to P&L in future. So this can be reclassified to P&L in future with respect to debt investments. And if it does not meet that FAT OCA model or amortized cost model, every other debt investments apart from these two models will be treated as per FAT P&L. So if it is FAT P&L, then we will not follow this kind of amortized cost model or something like that. We will calculate the opening value and we'll calculate the closing fair value, and the movement will be recognized in P&L, and the transaction cost will get expensed to P&L as well. Are you getting it? Okay. So these are the main types of financial asset, and with respect to financial liability, by default, we'll choose the amortized cost model. But if there is a derivatives or something like that, if it's a derivatives, then we'll choose the FAT P&L model. FAT P&L model. So with respect to financial liability, there is a very less chance that they will test it. So if it's a financial liability, then we have by default we'll choose amortized cost model. But if it's a derivatives or something like that, then we will choose FAT P&L model to account for it. And with respect to amortized cost model, if it's a liability, the transaction cost will get deducted from the opening value. Okay. So with respect to asset, the transaction cost was getting added, but here the issue cost or something like that will get deducted from the opening value. Is it clear, everyone? Can you reply in the chat? Okay, guys. So that's it for the day. We have completed the treatments of IFRS 9. So what it is left is impairment and the hedge accounting part. So that I will discuss in the next class, and we'll discuss the other main standards. We'll try to cover the main standards, that is IFRS 15 is covered and 16 is covered. So financial instrument, then the late new higher standards such as IAS 19, IFRS 2, and IAS 12. So these things will get covered in the next class, and we'll try to do the questions from it as well. Okay, guys. Do you have any doubts in today's topic? All right. Okay, so that's it. I will see you in the next class.